down is forward.
Okay, down is forward. Okay, hi everyone, my name is Brianna Bace. I am a recent graduate of the University at Albany and a Viceroy Fellow. I'll also add that being a Viceroy Fellow was the highlight of my collegiate career. So, just my opinion on that. So, today I'll be talking about the changing threat landscape of space. Outer space is a strategic domain that enables many of the functions that other critical infrastructure sectors rely on to fulfill functions that are required to protect the well-being of citizens and carry out military objectives. From a defense perspective, both the U.S. military and the intelligence community rely heavily on space infrastructure to carry out their objectives and to collect intelligence. Including communication satellites, reconnaissance satellites, weather forecasting, all of this infrastructure is very critical. Russia's cyber attack on Viasat's KSAT satellite broadband network at the start of the Ukraine invasion also demonstrated that nation states have recognized their capacity to interfere with the critical infrastructure and operations of their adversaries. And it was this attack that actually unofficially declared the space cyber nexus as the newest warfighting domain. So I'll provide a quick overview of space and some of the threats and threat actors. I don't have too much time, but there are typically considered to be four segments of the space sector: space, ground, link, and user. So when we're talking about the space segment, you're talking about the assets that are up in orbit: satellites, space probes, crafts, and generally space vehicles. When you're talking about the ground, it's kind of like what it sounds like: infrastructure, facilities, equipment that's located on the ground. And that link segment is the segment of the communication signals that allow them to talk to each other. And the user segment, again, like it sounds, are the users of the space data, such as GPS receivers, satellite phone users, satellite television receivers, that type of thing. A quick overview for space threats. When you have infrastructure both on the ground and in orbit, and that relies on electromagnetic signals as well as cyber-based systems to function, you have no shortage of threats. Just a quick summary, I can't go into too much detail, but you have natural hazards, you have physical threats, both kinetic and non-kinetic, you have electromagnetic threats and cyber threats. And for even this week, we saw a natural hazard being coronal mass ejections from a solar storm. We were just experiencing some of the positive repercussions of that was the nice solar northern lights that we saw, but it had the potential to cause some serious damage on space infrastructure. And threat actors, especially because of the capabilities of launching cyber attacks on space infrastructure, you have a whole host of ranging threat actors in this domain. You're going to have mostly, for right now, not the nation-state actors, but the lower barrier of entry into space means that you're going to have threat actors with less sophistication and less resources still being able to have an effect in space. So the rest of my presentation, I'm going to focus on two of the main reasons that have caused the changing threat landscape of the space sector. So first is the use of dual-use technology, or technology that can serve both military and peaceful or civilian objectives. For example, GPS satellites provide navigation data to civilians and also situational awareness to soldiers. Dual-use infrastructure also has the potential to bring increased investment into the domain and bring more, provide space products and services to a broader group of customers, but it also carries some negative implications. For one thing, the presence of dual-use infrastructure means that the line between military and civilian is blurred, and when an attack occurred against a military infrastructure, it could have cascading effects on civilians. And in international humanitarian law, there's no such thing as a dual-use object. And under that law, civilian assets can't be targeted, but in certain situations, military assets could be. So that creates some legal ambiguity. It also creates operational ambiguity because understanding an attacker's motivation and intent is less clear when, again, that line is blurred between civilian and military. And when it's harder to understand intent and it's harder to understand exactly what you're looking at, it makes it difficult to create definitions for key terminology, and without that, it's harder to create international agreements, laws, and even arms control agreements, which all of that makes it more difficult to ensure the peaceful use of space. And this ambiguity is also a problem because the U.S. government has already stated that certain states like China use this ambiguity strategically to achieve their own objectives. The second reason I will discuss for the changing threat landscape of space is the commercialization of the space sector through increased presence of private companies. Part of this is commercialization is the increase of commercial off-the-shelf components, or technology that requires less sophistication and is considered to be more cost-effective. So you have a lower barrier of entry into space. And this can be a good thing because you have more people operating, you have more people looking for innovative solutions. But again, even though there's that innovation side, you also have commercial off-the-shelf components causing some vulnerability to the sector. For one thing, these components are much easier to get your hands on. So that means that threat actors can get these components and study them for vulnerabilities that they can plan to exploit later on. Also, you have greater commercialization, meaning more complex supply chains, because you have more vendors and manufacturers in the space. And when you have a more complex supply chain, it's harder, it's less visibility, and it's harder to audit vendors and manufacturers for their security. And again, threat actors utilize this either to get their hands on different products and components so they can study them, or they may even try to implant vulnerabilities themselves at some point during the supply chain of a space asset. So recognizing the need to secure the space domain, there have been a number of legal efforts and international initiatives and published guidance to secure the space sector. Both the US and the EU have recognized that space provides essential functions, especially to the operating of other critical infrastructure. The US government hasn't officially declared space as critical infrastructure, but the EU has, as of about a year ago. You have NATO having previously stating that space is an operational domain and taking steps to bolster its deterrence and resiliency, particularly through the NATO Space Center of Excellence. And then you have, And then you have groups like NIST and NASA both publishing guidance, particularly on the cybersecurity of the space domain, which different vendors, manufacturers, and other space operators can use to really bolster their systems. So the rest of my time, I'll just conclude here that in closing, the expanding threats and threat actors we are seeing in the space domain are just the inevitable growing pains of a growing frontier. International organizations and government, academia, and industry, everyone has to come together to increase the security of the space sector. And this will include, this will also require a balancing act, because you have the increased security, but you also have to make sure you're not stifling innovation. So it can be a challenge, but it's definitely a necessary thing to have to be done, especially if we want to create a resilient space realm that can benefit us for years to come. Thank you.
We can take some questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
How do you see the third-party aspect, complexity of there, and policy intersections? What would be your recommendations for enhanced policy guidance for third parties?
So third parties, you mean like during the supply chain of the? Yeah. So for anyone that's not familiar, so when we say third party, we're talking about the fact that in the life cycle of a satellite, you have the parts and components in the satellite being built by an operator, but a lot of times those operators, they don't have the equipment to test the satellite, so they have to go to a third party facility a lot of times to have that done. That's part of the supply chain, and one of the attack vectors is in that transportation process or the testing process. I would say it all comes down to just making sure you're the cybersecurity of your facility, you're in control of that, but you also have to make sure the people you're utilizing for that testing and transportation are also utilizing a certain level of cybersecurity. I think that goes along with maybe making some of these voluntary guidelines maybe not voluntary and making sure they have that baseline set of security. I think that would be the most important policy step, because I think it all comes down to cybersecurity and just remembering that no matter how safe you think you are, you have to make sure your weakest link is not that weak, because again, you're relying on them and you're letting them hold your satellite and test it. So hopefully that answers your question.
What would you see as a top incentive to make that happen?
A top incentive?
Yeah, so how would you encourage the community, right? So usually you have to have an incentive to go along with that policy to drive that, right?
Maybe, yeah. Maybe some type of measurement of adoption, so that way, and then some type of, almost like how appliances have like an Energy Star rating, like that type of thing. So you can look at the operators and the facilities and kind of they have like that rating, almost like when you go to a restaurant, they have A, B, C, or D for health, like maybe something like that. They'll get more people using their facilities if they have a better rating, that type of thing. I would think that could be an incentive.
Through auditing.
Yeah. It kind of always comes down to like a little bit with money too. You want to make sure like they're gonna lose money if they don't have people using their facilities, so they kind of have to take it upon themselves to raise their security, or they're gonna lose those opportunities.
Hey, let's give one more.
Thank you.
Thank you, congratulations.
Thanks.